For every NBA team like the 1971-72 Los Angeles Lakers, the 95-97 Chicago Bulls, and the 2014-17 Golden State Warriors that made a compelling case for all-time greatness, there are equally bad teams. During the seasons where we have seen the greatest teams of all time, there are a few others that lost roughly 7 out of every 8 games. When dissecting the worst teams in NBA history, there are 3 points of criteria to note in this ranking of the NBA's worst single seasons. The first 5 seasons of each franchise's history were not eligible for the list. It's only fair to give new teams a chance to get their affairs in order before we can rake them over the coals. Both current and past franchises were eligible, provided they existed for more than 5 years. And finally, a franchise can only be represented once in the top 10. The Philadelphia 76ers, Los Angeles Clippers, and Denver Nuggets each had multiple viable candidates, but we opted only to include the worst season for each of them. While winning percentage was primarily the factor in choosing the proper candidates, these 10 worst ranked teams of all time were ranked in ascending order of perceived awfulness in the context of their respective seasons. So in other words, it's possible for a team that won 13.4% of its games to be regarded as worse than one that won just 10%. In most of these cases, it was a multiple season stretch of terrible play. Those situations will be addressed within, but for the ranking purposes, we tried to focus solely on the single question. And that brings us to this. What are the top 10 worst teams in NBA history? Like always, we might as well start with some honorable mentions. The 97-98 Golden State Warriors, the 2009 Minnesota Timberwolves, the 13-14 Milwaukee Bucks, and the 2014-15 New York Knicks. But let's jump right into the top 10. At number 10, we have the 2002-2003 Cleveland Cavaliers with a record of 17-65. Even for a franchise that had suffered at least 50 losses in each of the previous 3 seasons, the on-court product was still tough to watch. But it was all worth it when the Cavaliers won the 2003 draft lottery and got to take some local prospect by the name of LeBron James with the first overall pick. Also, Ricky Davis averaged career highs in points, rebounds, assists, and steals. At least he had fun jacking up shots while the rest of the team stunk out loud. How bad was it, you may ask? Well, a 19-point win over the 3-time reigning champion Los Angeles Lakers in the 4th game of the regular season was immediately followed by a 15-game losing streak. During that streak, the Cavs had a 41-point loss and a pair of 32-point margins of defeat. Not that there was a legitimate title aspirations before the season began, but the only thing worth rooting for was by the beginning of December, their draft position. Maybe it was all part of their master plan to lose a boatload of games, but the late July decision to trade Brian Sith and Andre Miller, the latter of whom averaged 16.5 points and a league-leading 10.9 assists in 2001-2002 for Harold Jamison and Darius Miles, did not age well. Miles was the number 3 pick in the 2000 draft, and perhaps the Cavs thought a change of scenery would jumpstart his once promising career. It didn't, and a point guard of Miller's caliber would have helped LeBron bring a title to Cleveland prior to his 4-year hiatus in Miami if he was on the roster. At number 9, we have the 2000-2001 Chicago Bulls with a record of 15-67. They finally embraced a complete rebuild. For the first 2 years after losing Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr, and Luke Longley, the Bulls were still giving a ton of minutes to veterans. But in 2000-2001, the only guy on the roster with more than 3 years of experience was Fred Hoiberg, who had 5 of those years. 8 of the 16 guys who saw playing time were rookies. If you're going to be awful, at least figure out who you can either build around or get good return on investment for on the trading block. 5 out of those 8 rookies were out of the league within 3 seasons. And while Marcus Fizzer and Jake Voschkel were able to hang around a little bit longer than that, neither of them amounted to much. The only one who panned out was Jamal Crawford, and the Bulls dealt him to the New York Knicks for next to nothing right after the first of his 14 consecutive seasons, averaging better than 12 points per game. By the time they made the playoffs in 2004-2005, there was literally no one left from the 2000-2001 roster. Despite having the worst record, the Bulls got shafted in the lottery and ended up with the 4th pick in the draft, in which Tyson Chandler and Pau Gasol went number 2 and 3 respectively. Chicago ended up taking Eddie Curry with the 4th pick and then traded its best player, Elton Brand, to the Los Angeles Clippers for the rights to Chandler. Yes, Chandler was going to be a good player, but he was no Elton Brand at that time. In his 5 seasons with the Bulls, Chandler went for 7.1 points and 7.7 rebounds per game. In those same 5 years, Brand was a 2-time All-Star who put up 20.4 points per game, 10.5 rebounds, and 2.3 blocks per contest in Los Angeles. At number 8, we have the 2004-2005 Atlanta Hawks with a record of 13-69. Both Josh Smith and Josh Childress were named to the All-Rookie team, providing at least some hope for the future. The Hawks also got Marvin Williams with the number 2 pick in the 2005 draft, and he ended up providing a decent amount of value over his 7 years in Atlanta. As far as career win shares are concerned, he was the 4th best player in that draft class. But too bad they didn't take Chris Paul instead. Atlanta wasted little time showing it was going nowhere fast, losing a season opener to Phoenix by 30 points. 1 month later, the Hawks were 2-14 and were on their way to a not-so-nice 69-loss season. Constant roster flux didn't help matters. Childress was the only player to appear in at least 75 games for the Hawks, while 15 different players started at least 1 game. Less than 7 months after giving up Jason Terry as part of a package to acquire Antoine Walker, the Hawks dealt the forward to the Boston Celtics for 36-year-old Gary Payton, 35-year-old Tom Gagulata, career backup Michael Stewart, and a first-round pick they eventually traded away. The best part is that they waived Payton a week later, and he went right back to the starting point guard for the Celtics. But at least they got those 53 games of Walker averaging roughly 20 and 10 for a horrible team. They were actually already quite bad, but the Hawks went 3-26 after letting Walker go. At number 7, we have the 82-83 Houston Rockets with a record of 14-68. It was a brief nadir for Houston. It won 46 games in 1981-82 and was back up to 48 wins by 1984-85. But the Rockets traded Moses Malone, 31 points and 14 rebounds and the league MVP in 82, in September of that same year, and Elvin Harris was rapidly losing his effectiveness in his late 30s. At that point, they had little choice but to bottom out for 2 years and restock with highly coveted draft picks Ralph Sampson, Rodney McRae, and Hakeem Olajuwon. The strategy was so effective that the NBA instituted the lottery the following year in hopes of combating what they had put together. 1 year after Malone and Hayes both averaged better than 16 points and 9 rebounds per game, combining for 47 and 23 while playing 163 of 164 possible games, no one on the 82-83 roster topped 14.8 or rebounds respectively. Alan Lever was probably the most valuable player, leading the Rockets in points, assists, and steals. But despite setting career highs in all 3 categories that season, he wasn't anything close to an all-star level player. While the Rockets never had an abysmal losing skid, it was like 1 step forward and 5 steps backwards all season long. Including starting the campaign with an 0-10 record, they had 8 separate losing streaks of at least 5 games and only 1 2-game winning streak. Their average scoring margin was minus 11.6, good for second worst in the NBA. At number 6, we have the 1986-87 Los Angeles Clippers with a record of 12-70. Michael Cage was a bright light in an otherwise dark chasm. He accounted for 7.2 win shares, while the rest of the team combined for 8.6 altogether. Cage averaged a career-best 15.7 points per game, as well as 11.5 rebounds. Naturally, the Clippers traded him away 1 year later for a rookie Gary Grant, and a first-round pick they also eventually traded away, in classic Clippers fashion. As has often been the case since the lottery's inception, the worst team didn't win. Heck, the Clippers didn't even finish in the top 3. So instead of getting David Robinson, they took Reggie Williams at number 4. Aside from the New Jersey Nets' pick of Dennis Hobson at number 3, every player in the top 12 of that draft class had a considerably more valuable career than Williams. Taking him one spot before the Seattle Supersonics selected Scottie Pippen only makes that look much worse. From 81 to 82 through to 1991, the Clippers had 10 consecutive seasons with a winning percentage of 0.39 or worse. This was clearly their lowest point during that stretch, but this wasn't some calculated effort to get back in order and get better. They were simply an embarrassment for an entire decade. At number 5, we have the 2009-2010 New Jersey Nets with an abysmal 12-70 record. The Nets haven't done much right on draft night in the past 3 decades, but 2008 first-round pick Brook Lopez was an exception to that rule. After a solid rookie season, he became the star of the team in year 2, averaging 18.8 points and a career-high 8.6 rebounds at that time. He wasn't an all-star, but he probably would have been if the Nets hadn't been such an abomination. They eventually salvaged things slightly by winning 5 of their final 12 games. However, the Nets infamously started 0-18. The 2015-16 Philadelphia 76ers eventually tied it, but that set the record for the worst losing streak to open a season. The Nets had 4 more losing streaks of at least 8 games in the process of free-falling to a 7-63 record. That's a 0.1 winning percentage, and it would have been the worst of all time if they had kept it up for 3 more weeks. It was hard to fault the new majority owner Mikhail Prokhorov for coming in and selling the roster for parts, but only 4 players, Lopez, Chris Humphries, Devin Harris, and Terrence Williams, who played for the Nets in 2009-2010, also played for them in 2010-11. And 2 of those guys, Harris and Williams, were traded away the following season. Worse yet, the Nets threw their number 3 overall pick in 2010, Derek Favors, into the deal in which they traded Harris for Deron Williams. At least D-Will gave them a few good years, but it took the Nets a while to recover after basically starting over from scratch. At number 4, we have the 97-98 Denver Nuggets with a record of 11-71. Denver had the worst scoring margin in the league, but at least it wasn't dead last on offense or defense. Golden State was slightly worse at scoring. The Warriors averaged 88.3 points, while the Nuggets finished at 89, and there were at least 3 teams that allowed at least 103 points per game. Denver posted a less awful mark of 100.8. So even though the Nuggets were the worst team in 97-98, they weren't quite as blatantly alone in the basement as the top 3 teams on our list. The Nuggets started out 0-12 and later added losing streaks of 16 and 23 games. There were 11 teams that won at least 47 games that season, and Denver went 0-32 against them all. Despite the worst record in the league, the Nuggets ended up getting the number 3 pick in the lottery. The good news is that meant they didn't take Michael Olowokandi at number 1. The bad news is they took Raif LaFrentz, while Dirk Nowitzki, Paul Pierce, Vince Carter, and Antoine Jameson were still on the board. They could have had a franchise changer. Instead, it would be another 6 years before they finished above 500, more than a decade before they actually won another playoff series. Failing to re-sign Dikembe Mutombo after the 95-96 season was the first clue that a multi-year disaster was looming. In fact, aside from LaFonso Ellis and Brian Sith, Denver went through a complete roster turnover from 95 to 98, and Ellis also left for greener pastures the summer after this 71-loss fiasco. Of the 16 players on this roster, Johnny Newman was the only one who would finish his career with at least 37 win shares. He wasn't a Hall of Fame candidate either, and the 34-year-old was hardly in his prime at that point. At number 3, we have the 2011-12 Charlotte Bobcats with a record of 7-59. This team was dreadful, but at least it was only a 66-game season. Being that bad allowed the Bobcats to tinker with their lineups and figure out more quickly that rookie Kemba Walker was more than just some guy who led UConn on one of the most unforgettable NCAA tournament runs of all time. By year 2, he was already the heart and soul of the team, and he would maintain that role for 7 seasons. The bad was bad. Not only did the Bobcats lose 13 more games than every other team that season, but they also lost the draft lottery. The New Orleans Hornets got the first pick in the 2012 draft and made the obvious choice with Anthony Davis at number 1. Charlotte landed at number 2 and passed on the likes of Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard and Andre Drummond to take Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. It's not quite Detroit taking Darko Milicic instead of Carmelo Anthony, Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade in 2003, but let's just say it didn't work out as well as Charlotte had hoped. Thanks to a season-ending 23-game losing streak, this was the worst single-season winning percentage in NBA history. Nearly half of those losses, 11, were by a margin of at least 20 points too. And as previously mentioned, they finished 13 games out of 29th place, so it's not like they were still tanking for lottery balls. They were just that awful, averaging a paltry 87 points per game. At number 2, we have the 92-93 Dallas Mavericks with an 11-71 record. The 82-84 Houston Rockets are often credited as the originators of the tanking philosophy. They were terrible in back-to-back years, ending up with Ralph Sampson and Hakeem Olajuwon as number overall picks. But those Rockets were still giving a lot of minutes to veterans. Dallas has fine-tuned the approach, almost exclusively playing guys with fewer than 5 years of experience in an effort to try and figure out which of their young contributors was worth trying to build around. Jim Jackson ended up being the only one really, but at least the Mavericks were able to get Jamal Mashburn and Jason Kidd in the 1993 and 94 drafts respectively. Lack of experience meant a lack of veteran leadership. Derek Harper was the only non-rookie on the roster worth much of anything, and the 31-year-old missed 20 games throughout the course of that season. Not that it made much of a difference, the Mavs went 8-54 with him and 3-17 without him. As far as advanced statistics go, this could well be the worst team we've ever seen. And at number 1, we have the 72-73 Philadelphia 76ers with a record of 9-73. At least Fred Carter wanted to play. It was a breakout year for the shooting guard who outscored everyone else on that dreadful 76ers roster by at least 672 points. Between that season and the next one, Carter averaged 20 points, 4.7 assists, and 4.7 rebounds. He was never an all-star, but he deserves some sort of medal for carrying Philly through the muck from its former Wilt Chamberlain and Hal Greek days to Julius Erving and Moses Malone. That counts for something. There were 17 teams in the NBA at this point, and Philadelphia finished 12 games out of 16th place. It's hard to believe this was the same team that went 68-13 and won it all just 6 years earlier, but that'll happen when you trade an all-time great in Chamberlain for nothing and then proceed to make poor choices in the draft for half a dozen years. From 67 to 72, the only remotely good player they drafted was Dennis Autry, and they traded him away 3 games into his 3rd season anyway. Even when the 76ers were trusting the process and tanking through the mid-2010s, they were never quite this awful. The 2015-16 team went 10-72, but that only put them in 2nd place in NBA history behind the 73 lost Sixers. Carter's mess of a team had 4 separate losing streaks of 13, 14, 15 and 20 games. It was 4-58 in mid-February before inexplicably winning 5 of its next 7 games. So there you guys have it, the top 10 worst teams we have ever seen in NBA history. It's not the type of list you want to be a part of, and I'm sorry to all the fan bases in advance for making you relive some of these past horrors. Some teams were bad due to tanking, others due to horrible front office decisions, and some just had absolutely no hope. But which team do you think is the worst of all time? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more NBA deep dives. My name is Damian Peters, this is Basketball Network. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.